The Korean War. A brutal conflict, often overshadowed. Sandwiched between World War II and Vietnam, it's a war many Americans know little about. Yet, it shaped the world we live in today. This forgotten war, as it's often called, deserves our attention. It's a story of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring consequences of global conflict. The Korean War was a tragedy for all involved. Millions of lives were lost, families were torn apart, and Korea, once a unified nation, was divided. The war had a profound impact on the United States as well. It solidified America's role as a global superpower and shaped its foreign policy for decades to come. The Korean War was a proxy war, a battleground where the United States and the Soviet Union, the two superpowers of the Cold War, clashed indirectly. It was a war fought with conventional weapons, but with the constant threat of nuclear escalation. The Korean War was a defining moment in the Cold War, demonstrating the dangers of ideological division and the devastating consequences of global conflict. To understand the Korean War, we must first go back to 1945. World War II had just ended. The Korean Peninsula, occupied by Japan since 1910, was now free. But freedom came at a price. The peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel. The Soviet Union occupied the north. The United States occupied the south. Two Koreas emerged. In the north, Kim Il-sung, a communist leader backed by the Soviet Union, established the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In the south, Syngman Rhee, an anti-communist leader supported by the United States, established the Republic of Korea. The seeds of conflict were sown, tensions between North and South Korea escalated. Border clashes became commonplace. Both sides claimed to be the legitimate government of all of Korea. The situation was a powder keg waiting to explode. The Cold War further fueled the tensions on the Korean Peninsula. The United States and the Soviet Union, locked in an ideological struggle, saw Korea as a strategic battleground. Both superpowers provided military and economic aid to their respective allies. The stage was set for a conflict that would draw the world's attention. On June 25, 1950, the fragile peace on the Korean Peninsula shattered. North Korean forces armed with Soviet tanks launched a surprise attack across the 38th parallel. Seoul fell to the North Koreans within days. The United States sprang into action. President Truman pledged American support to South Korea. The UN condemned the invasion and authorized force. American troops in Japan were first deployed to Korea. They were joined by forces from other UN countries. The North Koreans pushed the UN forces back to the Pusan perimeter. In September 1950, General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander of UN forces, orchestrated a daring amphibious landing at Inchon, a strategic port city west of Seoul. The Inchon Landing, a brilliant military maneuver, caught the North Koreans by surprise and cut their supply lines. With their supply lines cut and their forces divided, the North Korean army began to crumble. UN forces recaptured Seoul and pushed north, crossing the 38th parallel and advancing deep into North Korean territory. The tide of the war had turned. The UN advance into North Korea, however, would be short-lived. China, fearing a UN invasion of its territory, entered the war on the side of North Korea. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops poured across the border, pushing the UN forces back south. The war had entered a new and even more dangerous phase. Section 5, Chinese Intervention, A New Phase of War, November 1950, June 1951. The Chinese intervention in the Korean War was a turning point. The Chinese army, vast and determined, launched a series of massive offensives that pushed the UN forces back south of the 38th parallel. Seoul once again fell to the communist forces. The war settled into a bloody stalemate. UN forces, bolstered by reinforcements, dug in along a heavily fortified line near the 38th parallel. The Chinese and North Korean forces, unable to break through the UN defenses, also dug in. The next 2 years of the war were marked by brutal trench warfare, reminiscent of World War I. Both sides launched costly offensives and counteroffensives, but neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The war had become a bloody stalemate, with no end in sight. Section 6, Stalemate and Negotiations, The Long Road to Peace, 1951 to 1953. As the war dragged on, with no end in sight, pressure for a negotiated settlement grew. Truce talks began in July 1951, at Panmunjom, a village in the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. The negotiations, however, proved to be long and arduous. One of the major sticking points in the negotiations was the issue of prisoners of war. The communists insisted that all prisoners of war be repatriated, regardless of their wishes. The UN, however, insisted that prisoners of war should have the right to choose whether or not to return to their home countries. The issue of prisoner repatriation delayed the signing of an armistice for nearly 2 years. Finally, in July 1953, after countless hours of negotiations and countless lives lost, an armistice agreement was signed. Section 7. The Armistice, a Divided Peninsula, July 1953. The Armistice Agreement, signed on July 27, 1953, brought an end to the fighting in Korea. However, it did not bring a formal end to the war. A peace treaty was never signed. Korea remained a divided nation. The Armistice Agreement established a demilitarized zone, DMZ, along the 38th parallel, separating North and South Korea. The DMZ, heavily guarded by both sides, remains one of the most heavily fortified borders in the world. The Korean War, though officially an armistice, had a profound impact on the Korean Peninsula and the world. It solidified the division of Korea, creating 2 separate states with vastly different ideologies and systems of government. Section 8. America's Role. A Global Power Engaged. The Korean War marked a pivotal moment in American history. It solidified the United States' role as a global power, willing to intervene militarily to contain the spread of communism. The war also had a profound impact on American society, shaping its foreign policy and military spending for decades to come. The United States' commitment to South Korea was unwavering. The Truman administration, fearing the domino theory, the idea that the fall of one country to communism would lead to the fall of others, committed significant military and economic resources to the war effort. The Korean War also saw the United States embrace the concept of collective security through the United Nations. The UN Security Council's resolution authorizing the use of force to repel the North Korean invasion marked the first time the international body had taken such action. Section 9. The War's Legacy, a Divided Korea, a Changed World. The Korean War left an indelible mark on the Korean Peninsula and the world. It solidified the division of Korea, creating 2 separate states with vastly different ideologies and systems of government. The war also had a profound impact on the Cold War, intensifying the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Korean War had a devastating impact on the Korean people. Millions of Koreans, both civilians and soldiers, lost their lives in the conflict. The war also resulted in the displacement of millions more, as families were torn apart and communities were destroyed. The war's legacy continues to shape the Korean Peninsula today. North Korea, under the rule of the Kim dynasty, remains an isolated and authoritarian state, with a nuclear weapons program that poses a significant threat to regional and global security. Section 10. Remembering Korea. Lessons from a Forgotten War. The Korean War, often overshadowed by other conflicts of the 20th century, deserves to be remembered. It was a war of global significance, with lasting consequences for the Korean people, the United States, and the world. Remembering Korea means honoring the sacrifices of those who fought and died in the conflict, and acknowledging the war's enduring impact on international relations. The Korean War teaches us the importance of vigilance in the face of aggression. The North Korean invasion of South Korea was a stark reminder that peace is fragile and must be defended. The war also highlights the importance of international cooperation in addressing global challenges. The Korean War also serves as a cautionary tale about the human cost of war. The conflict resulted in the deaths of millions of people, both soldiers and civilians. It also led to the division of a nation and the displacement of millions more. The war's legacy is a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict. Section 11. Conclusion: The enduring significance of the Korean War. The Korean War, though often referred to as the Forgotten War, holds enduring significance. It was a conflict that shaped the course of the Cold War, solidified the division of Korea, and highlighted the devastating human cost of ideological conflict. As we remember the Korean War, we honor the sacrifices of those who fought and died, and we reaffirm our commitment to peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and throughout the world. The Korean War, a conflict frozen in time, serves as a reminder of the importance of diplomacy, the fragility of peace, and the enduring consequences of war. It is a conflict that continues to shape the geopolitical landscape of Northeast Asia and the world today.